Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alex Martin, and I am the head of GlobSec Brussels office, our newly open office abroad since January. I would like to extend a warm welcome to our panelists and the participants joining this webinar on European Green Deal, an economic stimulus during a time of crisis, organized or co-organized by GlobSec and Europe Jacques Delors. This event is part of a series called European A New Decade, where we aim to discuss the geopolitical objectives of the Commission, but also from our perspective as a think tank based out of Central Europe, we want to strengthen also the dialogue between Brussels and Central and Eastern Europe on these topics. We are in this very exceptional context posed by COVID-19, so it's critical to look also at the day after. And European Green Agenda is one of those avenues that will be extremely important in our recovery process. As mentioned, we have joined forces with Europe Jacques Delors for this endeavor. And before I hand over to Director Pons, I want to mention that we are on social media. So we encourage you to use GlobSec and Delors Europe Twitter handles, as well as the hashtag EU Green Deal. So I would like to also invite Director General Geneviève Pons to express a few thoughts before we kick it off and to address you in the context of this collaboration. Director Pons, as most of you know, was in charge of environmental and climate matters in Jacques Delors' cabinet during his last 2 mandates, and subsequently held several management positions in the European Commission. She has been also in 10 years with ILO and WWF, and she joined Jacques Delors in 2017, and now since January, there is a very new endeavor happening. So, Madam Director, floor is yours, and then we will move to our moderator for today, Mr. Vasil Hudak, Deputy Chairman of GlobSec, to introduce the panelists and kick off the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alex. I'm very glad to be with all of you. I know some of you, and especially from previous functions. I have been heading WWF European office for a while, and I've been heading the Jacques Delors Institute office in Brussels before creating this third Jacques Delors Institute in Europe after Paris, which was created by Jacques Delors himself in 1996, and Berlin, which was created by Henrik Enderlein in 2014. So this is the last born of a series, and we are trying to perpetuate Jacques Delors' vision. You know probably that Jacques Delors is still present and intervening from time to time when he thinks that it is very important to do so. He did so a few days ago to call for more solidarity in Europe. Solidarity in the crisis and solidarity beyond the crisis. And beyond the crisis, our vision is that we have to build a better world. We have the recipe for a better world. We have the Sustainable Development Goals, and we have the European Green Deal. And we think that we have an occasion, a terrible occasion, this crisis, but anyway, an occasion to be seized to accelerate the transition towards a better world. And the Green Deal has this capacity of creating jobs and capacity of relaunching economic activities after the crisis. So I will stop here because I will listen to you with a lot of interest, and I will have 5 minutes after other speakers to say a few words myself. So I'm listening to you now.
Madam Director General, thank you very much for these kind words. Also, thank you for joining forces with GlobSec in creating this webinar and creating opportunity for, now I see it's 212 people coming together to discuss issues which are very important, issues related to climate change, but also the impact that the current coronavirus epidemic has on the situation. And I think, as you mentioned, I think these are the times of crisis when ideas and the philosophy that Jacques Delors has been pushing forward during his time in the European Commission in Brussels is exactly what is needed. So my name is Vasil Hudak. I should serve as a moderator for this session. I would like to maybe at the very beginning thank everybody for joining us for this discussion. I know we are coming from different parts of Europe, even globally, and we would like to structure the discussion in the way that I would make some introductory remarks. Then we will go to our 4 panelists, and afterwards we will have a discussion. Please use the opportunity with the chat room. Please ask questions. This is really for you, for the participants who are on this webinar, to ask questions and to have a lively discussion. We would like to finish by 4:30, 16:30 Central European Time. So we have over 1 hour for a lively and good discussion. Now, maybe just to start with some introductory remarks, I would like to make 3 points. One, obviously we are now in a very difficult time, challenging time of dealing with the COVID-19 crisis. We are taking some urgent measures which in Europe maybe just a few weeks ago were unthinkable. I remember when I was in the Slovak government and we were discussing during the Greek crisis and financial crisis different aspects of stability and growth pact or other areas, and now we see that we have a relief from SGP rules. Governments are pushing money to the economy. The questions of debt and deficit are not primary issues anymore. There are major changes planned for state aid procedures. We have closure of borders in Europe and growing control of people's movement and communication. Many of these things would be unimaginable just a few weeks ago. I think it's very important that during this time when we are taking these urgent measures by different governments in Europe, that we also keep in mind that some of these measures may have long-term impact. So when we are looking and undertaking these measures, we have to take also longer-term view, because they will have an impact on such issues as European solidarity, dynamics of future of European integration, the multi-annual financial framework, or the future role of government in the society. My second point is that despite this urgency around COVID-19, the threat and challenges related to climate change continue. They haven't diminished. They are here, they are with us. And actually, if you look at the reports of scientists dealing with climate change, they raise several times the issue or the threat of global pandemia as one of the outcomes or potential results of climate change. So what we are seeing today in the form of coronavirus is in a way also a result of climate change. And the third point is that we do need to start thinking about the future, about the post-COVID world. This world will be different. I think it's too early to say exactly what will be the impact and what will be the changes in the environment. But we certainly have to, we will have to reassess our what I would call pre-corona thinking and some pre-corona assumptions and policies. And this is exactly what we'd like to discuss today, which is what does current situation mean for the European Green Deal, for the European policies, but also what it means for the people of Europe. So let me move to our panelists, and we have four excellent panelists who will drive our discussion today. I will start with Mr. Mariusz Waszczega, the head of cabinet in the office or cabinet of Commissioner Virginijus Sinkevicius, who is in charge of environment, oceans and fisheries. Thank you for joining us. Then we have Siegfried Morrison, a member of the European Parliament and also rapporteur for financing European Green Deal. Again, welcome, Siegfried. We have Emma Navarro, my former colleague and Vice President of the European Investment Bank. Thank you for joining us, Emma. And then, of course, Madame Geneviève Pons, Director General of Europe, Jacques Delors. Thank you for joining us again. So let me start with Mr. Mariusz Waszczega. I think that European Commission obviously is now very busy with the new situation. This is the time when, although in some cases working from home, it doesn't mean that that things are more relaxed. Obviously, the ambitious Green Deal and Green Plan are now being reviewed in terms of the impact of coronavirus. We also heard about the intention by the President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, to launch a new post-COVID economic stimulus package. So my question to you is, how do you see the situation? How do you assess the impact of the current crisis on the original goals of the European Commission in the Green Plan? And anything else you would like to share with us, please?
Hello, and good afternoon, and thank you very much for this invitation to this event with such an important topic and many things to discuss, actually. Indeed, the coronavirus crisis is a shock to the whole world and a shock to Europe, to European Union. So, you know, first of all, it's of course my heartfelt condolences to the families of all those who have died in this crisis, in this health emergency, but also a big word of thank you to all who work to care for patients, to all those who work to combat the spread of the virus, and also to all those who keep our essential services running. You know, I think that for the moment, the biggest focus of the European Commission is, of course, to win the fight against coronavirus. So that's why the European Commission is active on all fronts to protect lives and livelihoods, working closely with national governments, working closely with the member states, and in all possible areas and in all possible sectors. We have, you, Vasil, mentioned a number of actions that have already been taken in the area of economy. There is also a lot of coordination happening in the area of health crisis, in helping joint procurement of various protective equipment, in helping our scientists to develop new novel methods to fighting against corona crisis. There is, of course, a lot of things which we need to do to help that the internal market does not stop and that it runs. That the goods do not stop at the borders, that the critical materials reach the factories and so on, because we also do not want this to become a very big economic crisis out of which it will be extremely difficult to get out. And obviously we are trying to use every euro which is available in the European budget to invest it already now and to help member states to go ahead. But of course, and you already alluded to that, Vasil, that without this immediate response, we also need to already start thinking about forward planning, and we need to have policies in place which would help us to slowly and gradually, see how we can normalize a little bit, how we can start going back again. So on this one, I should come back to the European Council conclusions, which were done a couple of weeks ago, a little bit less than a couple of weeks ago, and they mentioned two particular documents or two particular strands of work, and one is the exit strategy, and here, of course, a lot depends on how our health systems are coping. A lot depends how is the curve of infection, how it is behaving, where we are on this curve, and how can we gradually go towards exit. But they also mentioned the recovery plan, and that is extremely important. It's a forward-looking agenda on how we can put our economies back on track. And it's I think recovery should not be bouncing back to normality. I think with this recovery, we should really be thinking on how to bounce forward to a better society, to a more sustainable economy. And I think there is a certain chance to do it because, and here I'm coming, of course, from the portfolio of environment, oceans and fisheries. So a healthy planet is a prerequisite for healthy economy. and healthy humans and healthy society. So two things were put forward by the European Council when they were referring to the recovery plan. One thing is the digital transformation, and another one is the green transition. So on the digital transformation, of course, where we would be now without digital, even for this event, we would not be able to have it. So it's extremely important, and it can certainly we need further work. We need further investment on that. But then a second thing, which is of course also at very close to the heart of Commissioner Sinkevičius, is the green transition. That was also mentioned as something where we really need to work in our recovery. And I know that there are certain questions which are being raised, not by all, but by a few. That maybe now the green transition is less relevant. But I think that climate and environmental crises, they are not going away. They're really not going away. So if we started our green transition, I do not really see reasons why we should be stopping our green transition. Of course, we need to see, what are the most urgent things we have to do to fight the coronavirus crisis and so on. But when we speak about the recovery package, I'm really convinced that we need to be continuing with the green transition. When we conceived the Green Deal and when it was started on December 11 in last year in 2019, I think we tried to do to make sure that the Green Deal is actually a growth strategy, so that it provides opportunities to Europe, so that it provides opportunities to European companies, to European businesses. I think it also holds now. In the recovery, Green Deal is an opportunity. It is a growth strategy. And actually it provides quite an added value, in comparison to a few other things. For example, the question is now being raised about the resilience of our economies. When economists are looking at the value chains and saying that the value chains are disrupted, that there is a necessity to increase our resilience and so on. And here, one of the important areas of the green transition, of the Green Deal, circular economy, which is also in our portfolio, is very important and a very promising strand of work. What is the circular economy about? The circular economy is about, making, using less resources, using resources more sustainably, having less waste, and where we have waste, recovering that waste recovering the resources from that waste and reusing it again. That certainly increases our resilience to crisis. It certainly makes us not only environmentally more friendly, but also creates economic opportunities. And there are more things like that where we could be looking in our recovery plan. Water services, investment into the nature restoration and things like that. But I'm happy to speak about that once we start with our discussion, and I will stop here. Thank you, Vasil.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Marius. I think this was a very good kind of update on where the Commission is now with its thinking. I already see some questions piling up also to you in terms of the ambition for carbon neutral Europe by 2030, whether anything changed or not, but we'll get to these questions later on. Now I'd like to move to Siegfried Morrison, Member of European Parliament. Siegfried, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon to everyone. Good afternoon, Vasil, to you. It's nice to see you again.
Great to see you again. I remember our time when we were negotiating the EU budget when I was potentially during the Slovak EU presidency. I know that you are busy as usual, and one of your responsibilities is actually to look at the issues related with to the financing of the European Green Deal and how it fits into the overall framework of the multi-annual financial framework. So my question is, of course, how do you see the situation now vis-a-vis the coronavirus situation, the crisis? Do you see any changes? What is the mood in the European Parliament overall these days?
Yes, with pleasure. So with regards to the first question, how do I evaluate the situation now and what is the link to the coronavirus, to the post-coronavirus world? Here, my first observation is the following. We need to learn to tackle more than one crisis at the same time. Just remember, 10 years ago, it was all about the economic and financial crisis. We made many decisions, and then as the situation was relaxing a bit, member states continued to reform, but they did not implement, and neither have we at the European level implemented everything of what we had promised to ourselves at the peak of the crisis. We did not use the time with the relatively good growth, with the creation of employment, to really do all of the reforms which were needed. Then the migration and refugee crisis came. All of our energy was focused on it, and we managed to overcome it, but still we realized there are still some things that we have to do. But we have not done much since 2016 in terms of our asylum and migration legislation in member states and at European level. And then came Brexit. And Brexit was keeping us blocked for almost three years, particularly the high-level leaders, the European Council, the presidents and prime ministers of countries. Very often when they met, they only had that one issue on their mind. And this is why my take is we need to learn to cope with more crises at the same time, because even with the coronavirus crisis, while we are busy with the short-term management of providing masks, ventilators, which is all crucially important, while we are busy with this and looking only at this, third countries from outside Europe, China and some others, are spreading disinformation in Europe, are looking to acquire European companies in strategic sectors. So we need to cope with more than one crisis at the time. And this first affirmation of mine, I think, is relevant also with regards to the environment. Because 1 year ago, after the European elections, there was momentum in Europe about combating climate change, improving energy efficiency, reducing CO2 emissions. But now, as we enter into other crises, as there are other priorities, we should really not forget and lose sight of the climate agenda. This is my first observation. My second observation is the success or the failure of the Green Deal will largely be decided by its funding. Much as we would want, to see things done, unless we provide for proper funding, and I will enlarge a bit upon it, private, public, European, national, local level, unless we manage to provide its funding, it will not work. And as you know, the costs for reaching the 2030 energy targets are above 200 billion euros per year. The previous target of reducing the CO2 emissions by 40%, if we officialize a higher, more ambitious target, then, as you know, costs will be increasing towards the level of 400 billion euros per year, eventually even more. This is why the impact assessment of how we can cope with these costs, particularly in the post-corona economic situation that we will have in the European level, will be so important. Now, on how is the mood in the European Parliament, what's the way forward and the concrete financing? The mood in the European Parliament is the following. The MFF, the EU 7-year multi-annual financial framework, can without any doubt be a solution, but it cannot solve all of the problems. If you remember, you all know, of course, in the context of the MFF negotiations, the European Parliament was the one European institution which was asking for the highest level of the EU budget of the MFF amongst all institutions. We said we want to finance cohesion and agriculture at the same level as they were financed until now. Of course, green them and make them also make a contribution to tackling climate change, finance them at the same level, finance the new priorities of the Union adequately in line with the commitments made by the Council, by the Parliament, by the Commission. So greening, digitalization, security, securing our external borders, and so on, and keep a reserve at hand, because the MFF is meant for 7 years, and 7 years is a long period of time. And for sure, in 7 years, unpredictable crises will occur. They occurred in the last 7 years, they will occur for sure in the next 7 years. So keep a reserve at hand, money that you would only activate if a situation of crisis occurs, not otherwise. And adding all this together, we said we need a budget of 1.3% of the national GNI. Council and Commission were arguing for much lower. In fact, it was particularly the Council arguing for much lower, and the Commission was too weak to defend its own convictions, the own priorities for which President von der Leyen was elected. So the MFF can be part of the solution for tackling the coronavirus crisis. For example, just today have I proposed to my group in the parliament, the EPP group, and they accepted the creation of a 50 billion euro EU healthcare solidarity fund, 20 billion euros grants included in the next MFF to improve our healthcare infrastructure everywhere in Europe, and 30 billion euros credits guaranteed through the EU budget to improve the healthcare infrastructure in Europe. So 20 billion grants, 30 billion euros credits. So the MFF can be part of the solution, but it cannot solve it all, neither for Corona nor for the greening. And one last remark now in the introduction, and then of course I'm happy to interact and to respond to questions. The European Commission rightly proposes the creation of a just transition fund to be funded 7.5 billion euros from new fresh allocations, which are to be matched, the Commission proposes, at a level of at least 1.5, maximum 3 to 1, with structural and cohesion funds coming from member states. This is basically a predefining of the scope of the funding of structural and cohesion funds. So basically it tells to a country, if you want to use the money for greening, you have to use at least 1.5 up to 3 to 1 ratio of your own structural and cohesion funds. So what I use this figure just to say that we should achieve the objectives of greenings, but not reduce the possibilities of member states, and particularly not the poorest countries and regions, to develop themselves through investments which they received, which they used to receive in the past, and which they also need for the future, for infrastructure, energy, digital, road, railways, and so on. I will stop here, and I'm happy to engage then in the discussion with everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Siegfried. Thank you for this voice from the European Parliament. And as usually in the past, the European Parliament is always pushing for a bigger envelope. Then the question is always how member states and the Commission adjust or respond to this. Now I would like to turn to Emma Navarro, the Vice President of the European Investment Bank, my former colleague at the EIB. Of course, the EIB has been very active in addressing the issues of economic recovery, addressing the most urgent economic aspects of the impact of coronavirus. My question, Emma, to you is more in terms of how do you see the potential impact of this situation on the climate ambition of the bank, which has positioned itself as a leader in dealing with climate change. Emma, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Basil, and thank you also to GlobSec and the Jacques Delors Institute for this very timely and relevant discussion. I am in Spain. I am in one of the most heated countries by coronavirus, and I can assure you that the situation is improving, but there is still a way to go. Well, I think that today all of us, and rightly so, are focused on combating the pandemic and taking measures to mitigate the economic effects of the crisis. This is a European crisis, asymmetric crisis, and I fully agree, and my institution fully agrees on the remarks that were made in the introduction on the need for a European response, and the EIB as the EU bank is prepared to be part of this response. And before entering into our climate work, I would like to take this opportunity to insist that the COVID package, we launched a first initiative some weeks ago. We are strengthening our support with other initiatives, and I can further elaborate if needed. Also to support our outside Europe partners in the COVID response. And as I see this, well, this is a terrible shock for the economy, because we are paralyzing our economies in order to combat the virus. But at the same time, we need to ensure that the companies that are solvent can survive in this unprecedented period, and that no economic fabric is destroyed in this period, or at least to minimize the economic cost. And I think that this is very much aligned with our green transition in the sense that we have committed, Europe has committed itself for a just transition, and so addressing these challenges that we have today will help us also to after support the recovery that of course needs to be a green recovery. And here I also agree with the comments that Marius made, that the coronavirus hopefully will be a short-term virus. We all hope that we will develop very soon a vaccine, and what we need to do is to reduce the cost for us. But we cannot forget that we are also confronted with structural challenges, with huge costs for human health, for our societies and our economies. And experts have warned us that inaction will bring us to tipping points with dramatic consequences. So I think that inaction is not an option for us, and hopefully the good thing is that in Europe, I think the commitment to climate is quite entrenched, and we are changing legislation in order to ensure climate neutrality. And so our commitment is firm. And of course, the EIB commitment is also very strong. You might know that last year the bank, the EU bank, scale up its ambition, its climate and environment ambition, with different objectives and targets that mean a quantum leap in our climate work. We committed ourselves to increase the share of our climate and environmental financing to 50% by 2025. We have committed to help unlock at least €1 trillion of investments from public and private partners by 2030. And we have also, and this is very important, committed to aligning all our activities with the principles and goals of the Paris Agreement, so that we are sure that our financing does not damage those principles and objectives. And last year we approved a new energy lending policy that meant that we will stop financing energy projects based on unabated fossil fuels, and we are working to see what other things we need to change in order to ensure this Paris alignment commitment. And of course, we are a partner of the Commission in the support of a just transition. We will be an important actor in the European Green Deal in support of and to contribute to the huge financing needs and the huge investment needs that are needed in order to ensure the transition to a low carbon future. And here we are currently doing a lot of work to ensure that we are able to deliver on our commitments. This work, this preparation has not stopped. We are at full speed addressing what we need to do in order to be able to meet these commitments. 2 weeks ago, we had our first stakeholder engagement event in order to engage with the different stakeholders so that they can participate and give us their views on the changes we need to do to be the EU climate bank as we want to be. And I have to say that we had this event also on an online format, our first online webinar event, and it was quite successful. And I want to take also this opportunity to thank everybody that participated, and also to inform everybody that we will have another event by the end of May, and to invite you to participate, to share your views on our climate efforts, and also I would like to invite you to send us your contributions to our journey, this journey that we are embarking on, that is so important. So I will stop here. I just want to reaffirm the idea that our commitment is still there. Of course, we need to, once the coronavirus ends, we will need to support a green recovery. This is out of question, and this is we will need to support the investments that are critical for Europeans' growth, and of course, green investments are such investments. And I think that we all need to have this awareness that climate is going to be an important issue, and we will need to devote our efforts also to this battle. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Emma. Thank you. It's great to see that the EIB is very active, and actually, I would say, picking up its activity during the crisis time, which is part of the role of the EIB as a counter-cyclical institution. Now, I would like to move to Director General Geneviève Pons. You have been in many prominent positions dealing with environment, ranging from Jacques Delors Commission to WWF, etc. How do you, as kind of independent person on this panel, how do you see the situation? In particular, how Europe should handle the issue of coronavirus, and how to combine it with the challenges of climate change?
Thank you, Vasil. So I listened to the speakers with a lot of interest. There are common points between them, and which I share. First of all, of course, the priority is to fight this crisis for the health of our people. Second, we learn a lot from this crisis, and especially in terms of solidarity between member states, solidarity inside the society. And also, third common point for all the speakers, we do not forget about the Green Deal. The time for fighting the crisis hopefully will be short. We have to devote all our energy in it now, but we have already to start preparing the day after. And recovery, as many of you have said, should not be back to previous normal. It will be building something better. So I would like myself to develop 3 points which are really going in the same direction. The first one will be about the link between the sanitary crisis and the ecological crisis. The second one will be the acceleration of the transition towards a different world. And finally, it will be about finance, inventivity, and solidarity. So first of all, the link between sanitary crisis and ecological crisis. We see it in 2 manners. This is true if we look at the origin of the crisis, and it is true if we look at the impact of the crisis. As far as the origins are concerned, we have experienced since 2005 6 pandemics which are of animal origin. And this is very much linked to our model of development, to urbanization, to deforestation, but also, and very particularly in that case, link with trade in endangered species. So the way we develop has an influence not only on our environment, but also on our health. That's for the origin of the crisis. Now for the effects of the crisis. There are terrible effects on our health, but there are also effects that are, look at our sky, bluer very often than ever. Listen to the silence in our streets, and also breathe the air. You have seen in many Chinese cities the pollution diminishing in a spectacular manner, and there are satellite images that show that. This does not mean, of course, that after the crisis we should stop taking our cars, stop taking planes, but we have learned that sometimes it is not necessary to drive, sometimes it is not necessary to take a plane. So we are experiencing an acceleration of certain changes which were already there, like digitalization. And what we should secure is to ensure that the crisis will not be a return back to the former normal, but a jump into a better world. And for that, we have positive investment that can be done at European level. We can, of course, encourage renovation of buildings. There are many ideas which are there. There are financial schemes which are possible. I am sure that the EIB has already reflected on that. And there are projects, for instance, I've seen the possibility to have a program to renovate all the schools in Europe. These are common European projects which are going in the right direction. We can also encourage electric vehicles. We have the European Batteries Alliance. There is also the possibility to develop infrastructures for electric vehicles. There are many, many ideas of investment that will boost recovery, be in the European common interest, show solidarity, and accelerate the transition towards a green economy. So do not oppose fighting the crisis, recovery, and Green Deal. There are many, many manners to combine them, and when choices will have to be made, priorities will have to be set, these kind of investments should be put forward. Finally, from the financial point of view, we learn a lot from this crisis. We learn about solidarity. We have seen what the European Central Bank has finally decided to do. We have seen that the 3% rule has finally been put aside. And we see that there are possibilities to forget for a while financial orthodoxy, to face a crisis, and to invest in the common good. So I think that we have learned a lot from this crisis, and that this crisis, as terrible as it is an occasion to be seized for building this world, this better world, the after better world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director General. Thank you, Geneviève. We have, I think we had very good introductory statements from different perspectives, different European institutions. It's just judging by the number of questions, it has already brought quite many ideas and questions which are coming from the people. Just on one point, Geneviève, that you made about the new ways how we will do things after this COVID crisis. You are right that sometimes we organize things or travel to events without really thinking about the cost and impact on the environment. Just if you take into account that we have currently around 250 participants in this discussion, which if we organize such a conference in Brussels, we can count how many CO2 emissions and how much it would cost to bring everybody together. I'm not saying that people-to-people contact and discussions are not necessary, but I think there are many things which can be improved in the future based on our experience that we are going through right now. So, but let's go to the questions. I think there are several really interesting ones. I will try to pick on some of those, but please, if you see any that seem to be particularly interesting to you, just raise your hand and we'll shift to you. But one specific to Mariusz Waszczega from the European Commission. There is a question about how does this situation that we are going through now and the whole post-coronavirus impact on economy, on the fact that basically all countries are counting on major decline in the GDP growth. A lot of public money, both in terms of European money, but also on the national level, are going to be used up for emergency measures. So we'll not, unfortunately, be able to rely on many sources for the future economic growth. So basically, the question is, how is this whole situation going to impact the ambitions towards carbon neutral Europe by 2050, on the goals for CO2 reductions by 2030, on the situation where, as we see, car makers are now really struggling. They are not producing. They will have major impacts on their balance sheets. And at the same time, if we add the cost of the adjustment to the CO2 decrease, obviously this is quite a major issue. The whole transformation that Genevieve mentioned towards e-mobility, which is necessary. What can we expect realistically, given this economic situation, how quickly it can happen? So basically, what is the impact? How do you see from the Commission point of view? Does it change anything? And in particular, and this is important in the context of Central Eastern Europe, where GlobSec is very much based, the issue of taxonomy. Any impact on taxonomy as we have it now, especially the role of gas, which is viewed in many countries as a transition fuel, the role of nuclear power in the future. There was question, for example, about decarbonized hydrogen, how important it is in the future, and to what degree we should use nuclear electricity, nuclear power to produce such decarbonized hydrogen. So I think it's full of questions which are about what's the impact on policies of the current situation. Mariusz, would you please take this one? And of course, anybody else?
Yes, I'll try. Many interesting questions which I
Yes.
group chat. And plenty of them. I'm happy that you have not asked me to answer the one on MFF, on multi-annual financial framework, because this one, of course, is...
No, I'm keeping this for Siegfried.
Which is still, of course, quite a lot for discussion, but, you know, so it's difficult to answer with certainty, but of course, it's a good time to actually discuss it. Well, I'll start maybe with taxonomy, you know, because taxonomy, I think what I would like to clarify from the upfront is it is important to underline that taxonomy regulation per se does not prevent investments in projects and sectors that are not included in that taxonomy. These investments will simply not be labeled as green investments. So it is actually a classification scheme aimed to provide a consistency, robustness to various green claims made for financial products in financial sector. So that's the point with taxonomy. Now, you know, turning back and trying to assess a little bit on how, what will now the influence of various rescue packages and on the various recovery plans will be for the Green Deal, for our green transition. I think it will all depend whether we actually learn the lessons which even the COVID crisis is teaching us, you know. And I will name a few of those lessons. First lesson is that we cannot ignore scientists. And it applies to everything, to whichever crisis you speak. You can speak to COVID crisis. Now we are, really listening to the scientists and looking how to deal with it at health perspective. But it also applies to climate change. It applies to biodiversity loss. It applies to any crisis. I mean, even if it's inconvenient, I think we need to follow science and prepare for the future. So this is one thing we need to keep in mind. What we also need to keep in mind is that Europe needs to be more self-sufficient. With this crisis shows how fragile the situation is and how quickly we can, how dependent we are on many things. And of course, this dependency has brought economic growth and so on. But we see also that there is a certain fragility, and we need to see how to become more self-sufficient. Third thing, which the crisis is teaching us, I think, is that industry is actually quite adaptable and quite innovative, and it can change fairly fast. Diversify, step up the production which is necessary in terms of crisis, and here I'm referring to various companies which are have now producing masks, which are producing using 3D printing for medical equipment. And another thing is, which is also very clear, is that by becoming more self-sufficient and more self-reliant, we can actually generate value and jobs in Europe, and particularly in the regions which really need them. I think if we learn these lessons, then we can actually get out of this crisis in stronger, more sustainable, with a stronger economy and so on. And here I listened really with interest to what Geneviève put a number of projects which are really interesting, and I can only agree to them. All what she mentioned is really a promising for the recovery plan, a promising thing for the recovery plan. But I can also name a few others which are coming from the portfolio of Commissioner Sienkiewicz, from the environmental portfolio. Separate collection and recycling of waste. I mean, this is also about self-sufficiency. We have a number of targets. We need to, and we can help to reach those targets, and by that we can create jobs. By that we can create new opportunities. By that we can also become more environmentally friendly. Plastics recycling, another thing which is very interesting. Various repair and reuse systems. This is also about circular economy. Landfill rehabilitation.
Thank you. Siegfried, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me also?
Great. Yes, yeah. Thank you, Siegfried. I think many issues which we touched upon are related especially to the availability of funding. And Europe can be only as ambitious and strong as it can mobilize funding for those areas which are really priority areas for Europe. Green Deal is one of those pillars for Europe, but also Europe can become a global leader. My question is, and you already mentioned as part of the response by the EPP group, potential creation of the 50 billion fund, which I think is a great idea in the current situation. So my question, actually two questions. One, to what degree do you feel openness or readiness of the member states and the Commission to reopen the MFF in terms of the size of the budget for the next 7 years? Is it doable? Is it realistic? This is not easy, but what's your feeling? Because things may change due to the current crisis. And the second question is also from the EP perspective within the Green Deal. This is actually one of those questions asked by the people on the webinar. What are the areas of priority? How would you prioritize, or at least from the EP's perspective, what would be the priorities for the Green Deal and why?
Yes. So on your first question on the MFF, absolutely, there is a readiness to reopen and reconsider it. The current proposal made by the European Commission was made in May 2018. Many things have changed since then. This is my first observation. My second observation, that proposal was too tight anyways. The Commission said, well, the Parliament asked for 1.3% of GNI, some member states 1.0. We made a proposal of 1.11, we were right in the middle. well, it was 1.11, but it already included some defense funding, which was not part of the previous MFF. So if you compare it to the previous one, it was 1.08. It was much closer to the 1.0 than it was to the real needs as defined by the parliament. And as I said, the problems with the MFF occur if it's too tight. Just remember, in this MFF, once the migration and refugee crisis occurred in 2015 and we needed to make money available for that area, there was absolutely no more margin for reaction and to fund bigger needs in any other areas. This is the problem with too tight of an MFF. I know the positions between net contributors, net recipients, the parliament are still far apart, but the solution is to put some money in reserve. So I'm realistic. I know that we will not have a very... Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, yes.
Because I see something else on the screen now.
Yeah, I think these are questions coming, which are addressed to you, yes.
What I want to say is it's not realistic to believe that in the end, Parliament and Council will be able to agree on a very, very big MFF. That's not realistic. The realistic approach is, an MFF which is a bit higher than what was circulated in the Council by President Michel in February, something which takes into account, the new developments, and then put something in reserve on top, something which you would not touch under normal circumstances, but only if a crisis occurs. That to your first question, and also linked to that, there were some questions. It
was about the priorities of the European Green Deal.
Exactly.
There are some priority areas where the Parliament feels more strongly about.
Exactly. So very important to us is also where the money goes to. And the Commission proposes the Just Transition Mechanism, 100 billion euros for the next 7 years. With the first pillar, the Just Transition Fund, which is money that is supposed to go into alleviating the impact of the Green Deal upon the people and regions most affected. And here the Parliament says the following: use the money to create economic development, to have job creation, because I'm coming from an area where coal mining is big. And we've seen there over the past 30 years, as coal mining was reduced, the people had the choice between poverty or leaving the area. The only viable alternative is, if you create incentives for investment there, for economic development, for job creation, because otherwise, it's just poverty or people leaving. So the European Parliament will very much insist not to use all of the money for short-term social projects, but really invest in renewable energy, new modern economic sectors into those areas most affected. And then there were, Vasil, two more questions which I would like to briefly touch upon, which I saw also linked to me. One was nuclear, gas, and then also the question if there will be a smaller ambition with regards to the European Green Deal now in the new context. On nuclear and on gas, the treaty is very clear. The energy mix is something of national competence. In my country, in Romania, we invest in nuclear. In Austria, some other countries, people do not believe in it. So that's why from the European level, we should not touch the competence of member states. What we should do is give long-term predictability, because particularly for long-term investments, nuclear and so on, investors need certainty, stability. So we should basically say what the plan is and what we don't touch. It's clear that we need to leave coal mining, but to some countries it's impossible to leave producing electric energy from coal and leave producing energy from gas at the same time. So gas as a source of transition, I believe at the end of the day, it will be inevitable. To the one question which was there, whether I see less ambition with regards to the Green Deal now that there is Corona crisis and other priorities, well, there is a majority in the European institutions, including in the Parliament, to tackle climate change, and there is a minority who does not believe in this. And of course, the minority now will use the Corona crisis to say, well, forget about the Green Deal. This is a minority. It will become louder now, but the position of the majority, and supported also by the largest pro-European forces, with different nuances between the groups, but the overwhelming majority, and on this we agree, is that we want to tackle the issue. So I do not see a smaller level of ambition, but as I said, the minority who's against, I expect them to become a bit louder and try to use the corona crisis to interfere a bit.
Siegfried, just you mentioned that it is possible to expect the reopening of MFF.
Yes. Yes.
What does it mean for the timing? Because we were expecting to finish during the Croatian presidency. Now it looks more likely for the German.
Very good question. So the European Commission basically signaled very clear that they will update their proposal, and I think that is correct and it's much needed. We need a quick agreement, so what's important is that we give certainty to the beneficiaries of EU funds, to the private sector, to the public sector, to the beneficiaries of EU funds. Ideally, we would agree on the MFF soon, and that would be a meaningful MFF for the next 7 years. But the truth is, we do not know how the world after Corona will look like in half a year. And this is why if we agree on an MFF now, it might just prove, the wrong MFF in half a year's time. So, but you also cannot postpone it, because by this you don't give a certainty to the beneficiaries of EU funds. This is why I believe, and there is more people in the parliament who are of the same opinion, that we need an emergency budget for next year. It's called a contingency plan. The European Commission on the other side of the table, it's still a bit reluctant. But under these circumstances, I think it's the best of the bad options which we have, because the ideal option would be to agree on an MFF soon, as you said, during the Croatian presidency, and to implement it. But can we agree on the MFF now? Is there political will, and would it be a meaningful one? Do we really know how the economy recovers, what the behavior of the people, where it will change, where our support is more needed? I'm not sure we would know that soon. This is why my plea is implement an emergency budget for next year. It's called a contingency plan, based on this MFF, with some updates, with some resources for Corona. As I said, the 50 billion fund for health, which I was proposing, which is for the next MFF, so just include a small part of it in the first year, and also with a bit of a different accent in some of the programs. So on research, innovation, put a bigger accent, on medical research, innovation. So basically some programs would need to be updated a bit, and particularly receive a bit of a larger healthcare prioritization.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Siegfried. If I may turn to Emma, I think you have already outlined very quick and extensive response by EIB to the crisis. I think this is reflected in the questions. One question, or type of question, was if, given the situation that EIB is in this kind of crisis mode and has to supply liquidity, support companies, economies, national economies in the EU, to make sure that there is economic survival and continuity post-COVID. Are you ready to compromise on some of the EGD goals? Are you going to, or what kind of conditionality are you going to introduce into the lending to the companies in this post-coronavirus period? And also whether you envisage possible changes in the so-called EIB COP, which is the annual budget for 2020, which was very ambitious for the climate part of financing. Emma, please.
Yes, sure. I would start with our COVID response, that this was also mentioned in the questions by the participants. We launched a few weeks ago as a first step, one initiative that seeks to mobilize 40 billion euro to support SMEs in Europe through working with our partners with commercial banks and national promotional banks, so that we are able and we ensure that the SMEs could receive working capital, bridge loans to cope with the current situation. This is not the normal investment, EIB investment. We are normally a long-term investor. But in this case, for this specific SME support operations, what we are doing is providing guarantees and other financial instruments to our partners so that they can mobilize this type of funding. And we have flexibilized, soften our eligibility criteria in terms of accepting working capital, for example, as an eligible investment. On top of that, we are also giving priority to healthcare investments, both in support of healthcare by member states or by regions, but also in support of research and development to find a treatment and to find a vaccine for COVID. And we have already a pipeline of 5 billion euros of projects that are going through a fast-track process in that regard. On top of that, we are also prioritizing and changing our annual business plan in order to try to help clients and other needs that are coming as a COVID response. And that is what we are doing with our own resources, but we have also proposed to go beyond that. We have proposed to member states to create a pan-European guarantee fund of 25 billion euros that will allow us to scale up our support to SMEs and European companies in these unprecedented times, and to be able to mobilize around 200 billion euros of financing to these companies with the contributions of member states by this pan-European guarantee fund. And so at the end of the day, if well, the pan-European guarantee fund is currently being discussed by the ministers, so, and by also our board of directors. So it is not approved yet, but I think that we can, I hope that this could be adopted. So that is our COVID response. Also, I want to make clear that we are not bailing out companies. The companies we support also with our investments must be solvent companies. What we want to do is to provide this support, this financing, which is more short-term financing, more liquidity financing to SMEs and to other companies that in order to allow them to cope with these extraordinary circumstances that we are living in. And the philosophy is to be able to save those solvent companies that were solvent before the crisis, and now maybe they are closed. And so to be able to withstand this period that we expect that won't be too long. And our environmental standards will apply to all of the operations, because the appraisal process that we normally follow will continue to follow. The thing is that normally when we support SMEs, we do this through banks, and also in this time, what we are also focusing a lot is on providing guarantees to banks, because we know that the ECB has provided a lot of liquidity to banks, but we must be sure that they are able to pass on this liquidity to SMEs so that they also benefit from the good conditions that are today in the markets. And of course, our transition to a low carbon future remains, and I think that the comments that were made that we will need to focus also on the recovery, and we need to ensure that the recovery is green, totally applies to the EIB. And in fact, our commitment to go to 50% of our financing to climate and to try to mobilize private investments that are very much needed, because we know that the financing needs to make the decarbonization of our economies a reality will need to come also from the private sector, because the financing needs are huge. But what we do normally, and this is also with the support of the Commission, is to provide, for example, the risking instruments to support those companies to make those investments that are green investments. And I think I will stop here. As I said, we continue working on our climate roadmap. This is our work to make sure that we are able to deliver on our commitments. We are engaging with stakeholders, and we want you to give us your views, to help us to meet this target, and to ensure that we are all in this journey of making Europe more sustainable and greener.
Emma, thank you very much. But there is one question, very specific one, which basically it wants a yes or no answer from you or EIB. In concrete terms, does it mean that no single cent of EIB money will go to coal mines and coal power plants?
Well, in terms of coal, we have not financed coal, I think, for more than 10 years. So I think that as for 2021, we have committed not to finance natural gas, although we have in our energy lending policy a clause that will allow for a revision in the short term. But I think that if we revise this, it will be to toughen and not to soften the requirement. So I think that the technology is evolving very fast, and this commitment in Europe is very clear.
Thank you. Thank you. Genevieve, if I may turn to you, and I would like to pick on your very broad and deep experience in the climate issues, environment, because we are now in a very specific situation in Europe, where we are, on one hand, we are tackling the crisis. Very soon we will have to turn towards economic issues of economic recovery, and people will want to see very quick results. Also, the European Green Agenda, the European Green Deal, will have to show to the people that it can produce benefits and positive, tangible results to the people very fast. It cannot be just about policies, about nice rhetoric, but it has to be translated into reality. So from your point of view, based on your experience, what do you think should be the priorities? What are the areas where the tangible results could be seen quite quickly? I mean, you already mentioned public buildings or electromobility, maybe this type of things. And in general, what do you think from the policy making in Europe, the current situation? What would be your advice how to deal with the situation, and especially how to deliver quick results to the people?
First of all, I think that you are asking the right question. So this will be a really guiding thread to decision makers. How to ensure a quick and green recovery. So I do not pretend that I have all the answers, far from that. And I was listening with a lot of interest to Marius, and especially has mentioned something which is very dear to me, plastic recycling. I am part of a mission about healthy oceans and waters, which has been set up by the European Commission. And of course, when you look at our ocean, you see that they are terribly polluted with plastic. Not only plastic, but plastic is something you see and something that make you understand how serious the situation is. And there are technologies which are being developed in Europe and which are available. This should be a quick win. It's activity, it's jobs, and it's it's a really spectacular result because we need to clean our ocean and waters. Okay, so I stop with that, but this is an example. Then I would like to mention two other points which have been made earlier. About financing, we have the problem of the ETS price. You know that ETS is something which is not only giving a signal to economic actors that they have to reduce their CO2 emission, it is also something which is used to provide funds, just transition fund, innovation funds. And presently, CO2 price is droning, and the ETS price is very weak. It has been weaker. Before the reform, it was I think 5 to 8 euros, and but before the COVID crisis, it was 25 euros, and presently I think it's 16 euros or something like that. We need to give a good price signal to economic actors. So for that, what do we need? There is a suggestion which has been made by many actors, and I think it is time now to apply it. It's fix a floor, a price floor for ETS to provide funds for the just transition and for innovation. Second point, which has been mentioned by you, Vasim, is about conditionality. The question you have put it to Emma, but we can also use the conditionality which is provided by rules about state aids. You know that the Commission is edicting rules about state aid, in which condition can the public authorities help their companies. They have been relaxed during the COVID crisis, which is absolutely understandable, but they will have to be renewed afterwards. And especially there are rules governing state aids for environment or energy purposes, and they will have to be revised in the coming months to be applied in the next period starting in 2021. And we should apply conditionality to the support which is provided to economic actors in order to step up their transition to greener processes, to greener production and services. So I think these are the the 3 points I wanted to make, but you have put it very rightly. The question will be how to combine quick recovery and quick greening of our economy. And there are many answers. So thank you for raising that point.
Thank you, Genevieve, and I love your term, green and quick recovery. I think this is what I would say is the motto of the whole discussion, and probably what we have to look for in Europe. We have about 8 minutes to finish, so I would like to actually go to each of the panelists, and in this context of green and quick recovery, because you all come from different institutional backgrounds, what would you say are 2 or 3 key priorities in your field for your institution, Commission, Parliament, EIB, in the civil society area? What would you, Marius, what do you think that are 2 or 3 key priorities for you and for the Commission to move towards this green and quick recovery?
Yes, I think it works now. Well, there can be quite a number of priorities, of course, on which we can be working. I think what we should actually remember is the phrase by by one of the founding fathers of the EU, Jean Monnet, which has been used very often during the previous crisis, right? It was about the fact that Europe would be the sum of the solutions that we deploy towards those crises. Now this phrase has been has been somewhat, forgotten, because we have been living in quite good economic times, and I think it's time to remember it. The biggest changes which we can do is during times of crisis, and here I'm quite reassured actually by what Siegfried has been referring to, and about the majority for green transition, for the Green Deal, and so on. So very frankly, I think we do not need to really, looking for something else than the Green Deal. Now we are going into our recovery and preparing our recovery plan, not yet going, but preparing the recovery plan. We need to make sure that the Green Deal is actually is very well taken up there, and then that's how we will make sure that our recovery is quick but also green.
So incorporating the key elements of EGD into recovery plan. That's
Yeah.
the big priority. Yeah. Thanks. Thank you. Siegfried, to you, any priorities from your side?
Yes, look, Vasil, I think what's most important is to identify the synergies between the Green Deal, the post-corona world, so health, energy efficiency, digitalization. So not let these priorities play against each other and, one be financed at the expense of the other. So health is very much about research, innovation, digitalization. The same is greening. So find the synergies between them. This is my first observation. My second one is convince every level, the public, European, national, regional level, to work together, and also the private sector, because none of us can handle this alone. It will require public and private funding responsibility. It will require a change of behavior from every country, from every region, from every branch of the economy, and from every single one of us as individuals. So, tackling climate change, succeeding with greening, is a bit like Corona was, It made us all stop for a second, look into the mirror, listen to the authorities, and adapt our behavior. So we need to understand that all of us will need to adapt to contribute. And as policymakers, I feel we have the responsibility not to leave anyone behind, because if people in a region or in a social category feel they will not benefit from this, if they see this as a danger, as a threat, it is just, the ideal place for populists, for Eurosceptics, for extremist forces, to step in. So our duty as policymakers is to take everyone on board and not to leave anyone behind.
Thank you. Thank you, Siegfried. Emma, from your side and for EIB.
Yes, for the EIB, the priority is to continue with our climate roadmap. We have a lot of work ahead of us. So we are changing many things internally. Also, we had a huge plan to try to see how we can support the green investments in what are the needs of every member state, what are the needs of the clients, what are the best instruments that we can provide, and we are still working on all those measures. But I would say that in general, I would focus on three ideas. We need to continue with the sustainable finance action plan. This action plan launched by the Commission is critical, because at the end of the day, we will need private investors there, and we need, as it has been mentioned, we need to join forces. So this is critical. Also, and this has been also mentioned, we need the right incentives. And so this will also come with some of the measures that the Commission has announced to give investors the right incentives. And the third question is that we should not forget also the global context, and we need to continue engaging with our global partners to ensure that the climate agenda keeps high on the agenda.
Thank you very much. And thank you for mentioning the global aspect, because obviously we are not isolated in Europe, and climate is a global issue. So we haven't talked too much about the external aspects of EGD, but certainly this is an important issue. Genevieve, anything to add from what you said before on the priorities?
Okay, so you invited us to make 3 points.
Yes.
First one, of course, recovery must be the occasion to build a better world. Simple. Now we have to look at what it means. So second point, choose the most efficient means to favor both recovery and green transition. This is about synergies, as Siegfried mentioned it. Third, more than ever, show solidarity between member states and inside the society. And I started with this word that Jacques Delors has employed many times and a few days ago again. And we should come back to his vision that he expressed already in the early 90s when he defined what would be for him a new model of development. It's all about sustainability. We should put more accent on the social and environment part of development, not only economy, but also social and environment. That's if we are able to rebalance our model of development, then we are on the right path for a better world.
Thank you so much. You actually made my job much easier because I don't need to make any big conclusions. I think what you just said really summarizes in a wonderful way what I believe was the main message from different institutions, from different panelists. And before I hand over to Alex, I would like to thank you all, thank our 4 panelists for the time, for the excellent ideas, thoughts, for sharing with us their concerns and what they are dealing with every day. And also thank you for working during this difficult time on those issues which are really important for Europe. So thank you again. Alex, back to you.
Yeah, back to me to wrap it up. I would like again to apologize to everyone for the disruption. It happens. It's a lesson learned for everyone. We are stepping up security measures in addition to what we already did. We would be happy to share with other organizations about this lesson learned as you plan to move forward with Zoom as one of the only available platforms for big convenings. We will continue to do so, but we will take additional, of course, measures. I would like also to thank again Jacques Delors and our wonderful panelists. We will also put together a policy paper of about 2 pages with your answers and the ideas. And we are also welcoming other inputs, and we will make sure that they will reach the European Commission, the European Investment Bank, the European Parliament, and maybe you can take up some of the ideas that were already discussed and the questions in the policymaking process and in the recovery planning after COVID. So again, thank you very much. And we look forward to continue this cooperation.